The Eyes of Fear, the Head of Pain, the Face of Evil, and Some King, by Johann Liberto. Chapter 3. Who's Doc? The crowded streets stunk of a foul smell, probably the dead bodyguard in the back alley of the shop. That wasn't enough to stop the thieves, though. They would raid and rape every man from here to the east, if need be. These weren't typical thieves. They were hungry scavengers, wanting to eat and take easy pickings. Every night, every time someone fell over, slept in the street, or was attacked, they'd come rushing in. A lone old man sat watching as they stripped the man clean of all his possessions. He was stoic. It was all he saw, day in, day out. He too was desperate, and waited until the crows left to scavenge for himself. Not long, maybe a minute, the guards showed themselves in chainmail and clubs, warding off the folk to disperse around the scene. The thieves scurried away, carrying everything he had. The guards chased them down, and then the body was now unguarded. The crowd turned to watch them flee down the alley's end. Slithering behind them, the old man saw nothing left on the fat lard. But something was beneath the back of the corpse, poking out. He reached under and pulled out a smooshed straw hat. He bent it back into shape and wore it on his head, proceeding to exit the alleyway, undetected. After a walk along the city, he sat down in his usual spot outside the markets. He saw others that lost everything in the war, begging for handouts. Seeing them, he mimicked their behavior and placed the straw hat on the ground. He too began to beg for money. But after the whole day, he only gained 2 coins and a letter. Curious of the letter, he opened it. The note was beautifully written, so well. In fact, it was hard to read it from all the dribble the common folk write. The note was splotched with a red stain on the top right. The wording was quite large, covering most of the page. You left your clothes in the graveyard, buried beneath the apple tree. Strange, he thought. Why would someone give me this out of all things? He didn't wonder about it anymore. Throwing the note aside, the wind carried it away. Laying his hands to his chest and fingers bound together, he had nothing to do. The letter fluttered and circled in the air and slowly fell onto his scrawny belly. Amused, He gave it another go. He made a paper plane and threw it. It went far into the sky. The wind carried it off beyond a rooftop. But it stopped. And he saw it happen. And it went against the wind back to him. With a sign of disbelief, he took steps behind and went up against the wall to get away from this thing. It was struggling to reach him like a lost dog. Unamused, he started to walk away, not turning his head. The wind became stronger and fierce and blew away some produce into the streets. He too fell over and held his hand to grab an apple. Instead, the note flew into his hand as he clutched for the fruit. Frustrated, he threw the note to the ground and it stayed there. He reached for a stick and poked it into the ground and walked away, flicking his head left, checking back yet again where he left the letter, and it wasn't there anymore. Feeling a thrust against his leg, he looked down and saw it unfolding and climbing up. He grabbed the note and was about to rip it up until he was noticed by a guard, so he smirked and fled. Looking at the note again, he thought maybe this was destiny. A curiosity drove him further along to quest out for these items. Though weary it may be a trap, he staked out the graveyard at night and saw no one there. He was at the entrance, peeking behind the gates. When the coast was clear, he climbed over the other side of the stone fence and looked for that apple tree. Sure enough, it was there, and so was a mound of recently digged up dirt. Not thinking to bring anything, peeking over both shoulders, he used his hands and dug until they were soiled. There in the darkness, he found the clothes written in the letter. A figure appeared behind him, and with a swing he was knocked out. Trapped in the bottom of a well, knives tucked in the ribs, caressing that rolling blood, infecting the flesh, poisoning his exposed intestines. Unconscious, he laid back against the stone cylinder walls, breathing his last, awaiting death to come once more. His pants were wet from the bottom of the well, feeling the slim waters left long untouched. Well water became red. The moss was soaked in it. Slowly he pulled the knives out, then placed them in his robe pocket. The wounds began to heal rapidly. His blue eyes dilated. A hay bag was over his head, with 2 holes for viewing. The rope went around his neck. A completely flat, emotionless voice spoke, echoing down to the bottom of the well, singing, "Marry is the middleman." It was a man's voice that was modulated and guttural in a manner of speaking. It sounded as if it was grinding against stones. Eardrums heeded his call. The man at top was manic. The man at the bottom of the well regained some strength, pulling off the bag and rope tied around his neck. In seconds, his body reshaped itself, rippling, changing form, as if something was crawling beneath the skin, shifting around, transforming the structure of the body. The guts slurped back in. His hair fell out, beauty to ugliness as blue eyes turned gray. The phasic torso shriveled up to a puny, skinny chest. The arms were deprived of muscle but kept a strong tone. Height went from 6'2" to a 5'9". The brown robe he wore was baggy for his size now. Coming out of the change, twitching both eyes a brief moment, shutting them hard and opening them slowly. A sudden confusion at the situation was stopped by falling dirt hitting the bottom of the well water between his stick legs. It kept coming, faster and more than before. The man at the bottom of the well tried to reach the top in a vain attempt to escape. The dirt fell more to the side, so he had the idea to build a mound to step up from the falling dirt, compacting it to the bottom well to gain footing, increasing his reach to the basin. A few minutes and the top seemed reachable. With a jump and a leg up, he came out on the flat grass. It was night. All around the well was condensed woods. A figure's upper body was cloaked in the dark shoveling. His back was turned to the brown-robed man. Shining, a lantern was on a tree stump, showing the shrouded man's checkered pants and breeches, shoveling up more dirt. The checkered man turned around mid-song and stopped. Startled, pointing the tip of the shovel at the man on the ground. "Oh! It's dangerous to sneak up on a man at night. Who are you?" "Sorry, sir, sorry." Grabbing the lantern, he saw the robes and had a change of heart. You come here now." Ready for a fight, the checkered man readied his shovel for a swing. A few moments capsulated the two, and as the moment passed, the man with the shovel pointed, circling around. "Get out! Get out of here! Go! 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 Go!" Fearing the figure, he got up and ran into the woods. The flight lasted a few minutes until his right leg was clamped on some trap. It went to the bone. It was surely broken. The loud crunch was enough to know. Bone sticking out the skin was another clue. Falling over made the injury worse. His scream sounded as if he was in a closed room. There was no wind, no crickets, no birds chirping or owls hooting. This silence was remote and wasn't noticeable until the screams began. Just then, flashes of light were seen coming his way. In a rushed effort to escape, he scraped some flesh off his high leg. It went up to the end of his foot. He couldn't free himself unless he cut it off. Using the knives from earlier, he began to cut around his heel. It was too hard to continue. But he was almost there, just a few tendons to cut through. It would only be a few more. Just a few more, he thought. The light was closing in, so he finally maned up and went for it, not stopping until he saw with his own eyes when it was severed. A rush, tenuous and tender, overcame him. He fumbled on the ground and hopped a little till he fell again. He wasn't done yet. The foot was hanging by threads, but was enough to set him free. It flopped about in the cold. Crawling was the last option. He went past a few trees and found an open cavity large enough to fit a person. The pine wood was his hiding place for now. The light shined to the cavity of the tree, showing a trail of blood leading to the hole. It wasn't the checkered man, though. It was an orange fox, shaking, with flickering yellow eyes, staring at the ugly fellow, bunching his limbs to hide. Letting out a growl, the fox closed in on him, snarling. Then the fox was shot on its side. A large arrow went through its side. It died instantly. You could hear the footsteps as they slowly approached. The leaves rustled while he attempted to stay awake, but he couldn't hold on, so he let go. It was warm and comfortable. The bed was cozy and lax, cotton-lined and bristle-stitching. The first thing you could hear was music, a kind of harmony, a slight tinge in tone, bringing with it solace. The injured man awakened in no distress at all. He uncovered his face, turned over, and saw to his right a long mirror. He was back to being his younger, fitter, more attractive self. The room was enough for one person, small, yet enough. The doorknob opened, and in came an elderly lady dressed in green garments. Like a fuzz her hair was, she had a tad bit of a lean when walking, and like the elderly spot's veins and the skin weren't youthful. Taking a gasp covering her mouth, "Who are you?" He hid beneath the covers in an attempt to cover his face. He attempted to get away with the act long enough to last until he thought of a better alternative to escape. The old woman left the room in a rush. She closed the door behind her. There was bickering, astonishment in voices, and shuffling about. The door was left cracked open for eyes to peer out and see, but then it went silent. That silence was triggered by an older man's jeer. It was loud, outclassing and diminishing all the voices outside the room. An older man came in and pressed his hand on the leg of the man hiding his face. He tugged at the edge of the blanket. "We won't hurt you. You can come out." The young man revealed his face to the preacher. The preacher was stone in presence, but stoic. Gray hair, glasses, black suit, white dress shirt, and a clean haircut. He slowly cracked a smile to his right cheek, leaving his mouth open and teeth bare. He got up and grabbed the sheets and pulled them off in a show. Dust swept away, his eyes in awe, and he couldn't believe it. The preacher chuckled to himself. "Where did the other man go?" "What other man?" Looking back, "I thought for sure I locked that door." He looked again at the man's clothes and noticed they looked exactly like the other man. "Are you in some kind of cult, or—" He looked at his chained wrist to the bedside. "How'd you—" "But I—" The blood all over the bed was dried on his leg by the wound from last night. "Getty, are you hungry? The doctor from last night came and said there was nothing to be done. I can't believe How did you?" "Please, by the grace of God, I must know your name. I'm Marwell Bishop." Bishop reached out his hand in greeting. The man replied in jest, "Doc, they call me Doc," shaking his hand. "Well, Doc, I don't know what to do." Staring into his eyes, "I have questions for you." "Hey, sorry, but I gotta go." Keeping the hand firm. "Leaving so soon?" "Yeah, I have important things left undone." "Yeah, not letting go." "Where you gonna go?" Looking like a lost sheep. "I don't know." Unlocking his hold, he leans over, left hand on his shoulder. We were in the middle of a song and the end of Sunday prayer. "You could join us if you want. We have food waiting for us afterward downstairs." Felling Coke's Doc was hesitant. "Look, I don't want any trouble. I'm not a demon, a monster. Whoa, take it easy. Relax. I'm not going to tell anybody." "You're not?" "No, I've seen plenty of strange things in my lifetime. Things that might seem otherworldly." Hand out towards Doc. "I've been exposed to it too." As the preacher unbuttons his shirt, Doc looks directly at the growth on his chest. It's an uncanny thing moving, like a giant vein inside his body, slithering around, being exposed. "It was 10 years, I think, I've lived with this thing inside me. Sometimes it speaks. Cutting him off, it speaks. Well, it lets me know things. It's not language per se, it's like a feeling. If there's any danger or ill intention, it lets me know. I use it a lot when assessing people. It's a useful tool. I'm guessing you have the disease too?" "I don't know. This is the first time I noticed something this weird. I was older. I lived for years as a beggar, homeless. I never knew of anything so strange in my life. I wasn't exposed to it." Maybe you're a late bloomer? From time to time, there's some people that come in out of town that have extraordinary abilities. Magical in a sense. I used to think when it first happened to me that God was testing me by sending a demon to possess me to test my faith. I was unaware I wasn't the only one who was going through the change too. So what happens now? Getting out of the chair. Well, like I said at the end of Sunday prayer, we're going to eat so you could join us if you wanted. Up to you, really. If you want, you can stay or go. Either way, your secret's safe with me, pointing to himself. A walking confessional. I think I'll just leave after dinner or breakfast, whatever you're having. Obliged with a quick nod. But we gotta get you out of those clothes first. Bishop got up and rummaged through a drawer of his. He grabbed a few things and placed them on the bed, and then he went for the door. Don't worry, I won't tell anyone. I'll just tell them you were a passerby and you couldn't find any logging, so I offered you my bed. I guess I'll tell them I sent the body to the morgue already. It's going to be fishy, but I'm sure I can lie, Lord forgive me. Getting up, he clothed himself in new garments. It was a white buttoned shirt and blue dress pants with a nice set of brown dress shoes. To and beyond the door he felt a shiver. All the eyes were upon him and waiting to see who was behind the door. As he went through, the church hall was open, and everyone was sitting staring at him. Bishop came out behind and walked to the podium. This church wasn't large enough to hold over 100 people, but just enough to be below those numbers. It was small in comparison to the northern churches. Standing a few feet above the audience at his podium, he had a microphone. Tapping it, "In the grace of the Lord, a new visitor has come, and I'd say we welcome him in open arms to this community if he chooses to stay." Looking to Doc, he said slowly so he would catch on, "He is, well, I can't remember. What'd you say you were? Catching on to the game. A traveler from Oakwheel." "Ah, yes, how could I forget? Ha-ha! Old age." Looking at all the faces of the congregation, the few who were in attendance, about 30, didn't say much. "I ask of each of you to treat this man with respect. He's a guest of my church. Now may you all please stand and sing with me again." Before they could, a lone man stood up and asked what of the newcomer's intentions were. The preacher didn't say anything at first. He looked at Doc for a moment in study, then said, "I'll vouch for this man, Jacob. He's just as afraid as you are." That didn't appease some of the people still unsure of what Doc was or his reason for being here. Now look, that man couldn't find any logging, so I offered him by bed. Jacob, skeptical. If he wanted a bed, why not use the inn? Why didn't you let anyone know that the body was taken out the room before you sent Betty in to check on the man from last night? The preacher was stumped. "Jacob, I'm old. I forget things. I forgot to tell Betty that he was sleeping in my bed." Quick reaction. "Then why did you act so surprised when she told you who was in the bed? You yourself went to see. This is all." It's all a bit strange. A fidget from him, and the rest of the people were in a trance too, the preacher as well. This wasn't supposed to happen. Doc was taken aback, but then they began singing a famous church song. It was accompanied by a lone old piano player. She had to be in her 80s, her hair was white, and she played with the tune. It was nice, very peaceful. This church had believers of true passion and commitment of Christ that sang their souls out. Most of them were much older than common folk you'd see, but they seemed happy. As Doc looked at each of their faces, they seemed to be in sync, a gentle yet loving look of admiration and homeliness. He was jealous that they had something like that. As if a ghost had flown through him, he too could feel it just a bit. Congregation was over until the bell ringer ran up the stairs to the small tower that held the town bell, ringing it to end the session. Doc was gifted a bag of bread from Jacob and then left the church outside. The preacher walked down to Doc, but was stopped by a couple of villagers who seemed concerned. The town was small, a few houses here and there, enough for a little over 100. People dressed in normalcy that in being, they dressed like the common folk of the South, the saviors, the pilgrims of Goss. The women from before that went into the bedchamber, went out of the church door, and was hobbling to the fleet of stairs. She looked down, unsure of how she would make it. Their eyes meet. Doc leant out an arm. She looked at it and took the invitation. They slowly made it down a few steps. At the end, he let her go, and she looked back and smiled. Was it a feeling? A keen sense of the ear, or the prickle of the spine? No, it was a grip to the soul that he felt, stringed and latched onto something close. Standing outside to the back of the door, watching the townsfolk walk by, he was unable to move, as if it was a sixth sense. He felt the presence. It was behind to the left of the church building. He moved slowly to confront it. It was gone. Bishop came outside last and placed his hand on Doc's shoulder. "You okay? We didn't scare you enough to leave." Don't worry about Jacob. He's just wary of new people. We haven't had someone like you come here since the pilgrims came with their fancy technology. You're a sign of good things, I'm sure. So please, won't you stay for dinner?" Taking his hand off, "No, I'm sorry, I can't. I have to go." Reattaching his hand to his shoulder, "Go, well, if you want, but before you do, stop by Miss Aunt Merle's." Grabbing his shoulder again and pointing, they both look. "She lives across the village in the woods, up there beyond the creek trail, couple of minutes east. She told me if you were alive, well, the previous you, to come and deliver you to her. I thought maybe you two knew each other." "I don't think I do. I don't remember that name." "Just something to think about before you head off. If you go, make sure to say I said hello." Marwell left and was bombarded with the other folks in town. Doc gathered himself and tried to leave the town. He felt it again, a tug of the sleeve compelling him to turn around into the forest. He took a double look at the forest path and looked confused. Intrigued, he decided to head back to it. What the hell's going on? Why am I going down here? He continued until he found a house surrounded by woodland trees and a well. The well looked exactly like the one he climbed out of. But it couldn't be because there was no house next to it to be seen at the time. The door to the house opened by itself. An arm scooped in the air, motioning to come in. Doc jumped, turned around, and began to run. A shovel was thrown from the house and hit him square in the back. Doc went on all fours and felt his back. Looking up, he saw the checkered man again. "I told you to leave!" They tussled, and the checkered man held him down and beat him into submission. Taking the shovel, he beat the shit out of him till he stopped getting up. "Why would you come back?" He tied rope around his ankle and slowly dragged him inside. He tied him to a bed connected with the second in an old wooden, open living room. He took out a carving knife and attempted to shank him in the chest multiple times. The thrusts weren't strong enough to penetrate the flesh, so he just sustained some bloody scratches. There was an older woman in the back watching. Doc couldn't see her face, but she was ancient for sure. The women got up and took the metal shiv from the checkered man and didn't hesitate to slit Doc's throat. Choking on his own blood, the time to change began. While the change was taking place, the checkered man took a black syringe out. Something inside it appeared to be moving. He injected it into Doc's forearm. As the change was nearing, at the top of Doc's head was a blob mass forming and growing outward. It was the size of a walnut. The checkered man backed away. The old women from the corner didn't make a noise. Turning to her, "I think I'm done." Passing out, Doc flipped his head back onto the pillow. Bearing witness, the old women moved in closer for inspections. The skin folded back from the black blob, and as the blob grew, it began to form a face. Doc opened his eyes again. He found himself bounded, feeling a strange weight attached to his head. Looking back, you could see a deformed row of eyeballs and tendrils grown from his skull. He screamed in horror. The other head tried to repeat the same words, but said them slower. The checkered man sat outside and looked in a daze. He didn't want to go back in that room. The women from inside came out and looked down at the checkered man. Her gaze was that of an upset parent. He tried to look up at her, but didn't out of fear. She then walked away to the village. He heard the screams from inside and plugged his ears with his hands, ran and followed the old women to town. He walked up close to her and tried to talk to her. "I can't do it." She didn't say anything. "I don't want to be here anymore." She didn't even acknowledge his presence until he told her, "Can't you just do it?" Stopping her walk, she rolled her eyes. With that, he rushed off into the bushes and veered left to the forest. He ran like a wild animal and didn't care where he was going, just that he was far away enough to escape. Running through bushels of peaches and brushing against every tree he'd hit himself with, he ran as far and long as he could, until he couldn't anymore. A reminder was all he needed. The sight of a monster in the forest, a familiar sight he would see from now on. It stopped devouring his body. The eyes that were given to him looked him into the human eyes he had, and it said, "Deal or no deal, I'm not done yet. Get your ass back there and finish what I started." Looking at the checkered man, "I won't, I can't," talking to himself while looking at the monster. Avoiding the problem won't solve it. He looks to the ground to see a dead rabbit. "Someone sounds like they're having a good time." So said I. The grass changed color and licked the blood of the rabbit. It turned brown and shriveled and died. The fact was, it was too full. What am I thinking? His mind wandered off, daydreaming, and more of it was to come. Snapping out of it, the checkered man was back and sitting on a wooden chair and watched the process up close. This is freaky. Doc's right hand was loose. The body was shrinking a bit and begun to recede into the black small blob. "What did you do to me?" "I was told to bury you, and I chickened out, so now I have to imprison you." Poking the blob, "This thing." The syringe was filled with this weird slime. Daydreaming while feeling empty inside, the fountains ran dry. Together, we awaited the endless dance to begin. I grabbed him by the waist, and he followed me. Circling continuously didn't bring out madness, but a calm trance. There was nothing around us until the dance began, and when it did, everything reacted to it. The shouts of anger, the praise, wonderful boast to continue on, and the quiet we stumbled into. Each light we made formed from our feet, shining so bright you could see our faces finally. I was in love. Getting a punch ready, "What the hell are you on about?" "I'm sorry, I just can't let go." Then Doc flew up out of his rope and swung at the abhorrent man. He ran as fast as his body would take him outside, heavily breathing and running to the town. The abhorrent man got up, face swollen, and chased him outside. He stopped at the tree stump, the left outside the house and pathway. An axe was lodged into the stump. He attempted to grab and chase, but it was too tight. He pulled it a second time with all his strength, and it was free. They were in mere feet from another, and the checkered man swung wildly at Doc. Doc ran to the town square and called out to anyone who'd help. A local pedestrian crossing a small bridge over a stream stopped and waved at Doc. Doc yelled out, "Help me!" The checkered man stopped the pursuit and looked at them both. The pedestrian froze in place and lowered his hand. His expression stayed fixed, and he stared into space. Not sure what to do, the checkered man began to walk away, but then Doc let out another plea. "What are you?" Still in place. "What?" Turning to see what was going on, the checkered man realized that something was off. Doc turned to face the checkered man and continued to run. The man, too, continued his pursuit. Running for several minutes, the sweat began to pile up. The town was just around the corner, where a whole group of people were talking. They looked to Doc, and as he screamed, "Help!" the people just stared and stood in place, blinking and not reacting to him at all. "What the fuck? What are you people waiting for? Help me, damn it!" Behind him, a long swing of the axe to the leg, and then Doc came down. The checkered man closed his eyes and dropped the axe. It was lodged into his leg. Screaming, Doc tried to unhinge the axe, but it was too deep. The people just stood there. The old woman from earlier came up to them and seemed shocked too, and was unsure what to do. It was then a voice was heard. It was hushed, mumbled, and with it the people dispersed and went about their day. The old woman picked up a rock and slammed it against Doc, knocking him unconscious. On being dragged, he was tied and bound with chains. The old woman was dragging him through the forest. The checkered man dragged the axe alongside them, too. She was pissed, but more in a moody kind of way. They came back to the house, and the man with the axe pushed the door open. He was shaking. The woman motioned him over to help place him on the bed. The mass had covered half his body over his mouth like a black skin suit. He didn't squirm, only letting a jolt to the leg time to time. A wounded rabbit hopped to the house door. Scratches could be heard outside. The old woman opened the door and looked down at the bleeding creature. Black goo was dripping from its wounds to the side, which was engorged upon by some animal. It was biting down on some letter. She let it in, knowing for sure it had to be planned. Axeman fumbled at the rabbit. The rabbit peered and saw Doc bound. The rabbit spit out the letter, hopped to the door, and keeled over. It lied motionless on the hard floor. The goo came out and ventured out the door. The women took the ears of the rabbit and prepared dinner. The checkered man took the letter and opened it, reading it. Letting it down over his face, I can't do this, rushing over to the women's side while I'm not that kind of guy. I'm a murderer. A chop with a blade cutting the rabbit apart was enough for him to back off. She shook her head in disappointment and sighed. She took off the skin and began to work with the bones. The man was beside himself and looked at the man at the bed. He weighed his options and placed the letter in his pocket. He came to the door and locked it. He headed upstairs and was gone from sight. The women continued, and once she was done, she cleaned up and took the meat to a pot in the corner of the room. The pot was already boiled with water and vegetable broth, carrots and celery. She tossed them in and closed with the lid. The women walked up to the man on the bed, almost overtaken completely, and touched the black skin suit. It reacted to her. It felt metallic and had an oily liquid coming out from its pores. Attending to her stew, she went to the pot and stirred it. Outside, the checkered man came to the bridge again and saw the same man from earlier finishing. The fisherman gathered up his rod and other tools and set off. He didn't seem perturbed or startled at the checkered man. He did look at his pants for a bit, though. Continuing to the town center, there was no one in sight except for a few people looking to head home. The axeman seemed perplexed at this, and so he took out a cig and lighted it with a match. He smoked it in front of everyone and contemplated something. The church bell rang one final time for the town as dark was near approaching. The town settled down considerably. Though its residents were in low numbers, the fact was this was a busy town. Things needed to get done. The schoolyard was filled with children playing and chasing on another, even in the dark. They didn't seem afraid, more like they were very carefree and not worried at all. The school was smaller than the church and was directly beside it. The rest of the town was getting ready to retire. The doors locked, the windows shut. The lanterns lighting the trail path were lit as the sun waned. From the distance, a group of nefarious children egged on a child in a ridiculous get-up. A kid wearing a pot over his head walked to the checkered man and announced his title as the new King of Nora, proclaiming his role. "Yes, it is I, Lord Pottington. You, sir, have been shirking your duties as of late." The boy was snarked at from a distance by his friends. Furthermore, "Good sir, what, pray tell, is that you're eating?" Holding out the cig. This is tobacco." Yucked out. "Tobacco? That stinks. My mother told me to avoid it. She knows things from the pilgrims. They told her it causes," he stops to think of the word, "can something. Cancer? Yeah, I think that's it anyway. I have a castle to run." The boy ran back to his friends, who were already rolling with laughter. The boy in the pot waved back to the checkered man, and the man gave a bit of a motion. The priest, Brother Bishop, was a yard away, lighting the reaming lanterns to light the path to town. He came heavy-handed, with a ladder and a long pole of sorts to relight them. When approaching the checkered man, he gave a friendly nod and smile and continued his work. The man still smoked away. While on the ladder fixing the lantern window box, did Doc pick up his note from Aunt Merle's? The checkered man gave a begrudging shrug, but the priest didn't see it. You know, in all my years of reading the Bible, I've never seen a real miracle with my own two eyes. I mean, I've seen common ones, but not one that jumps out from the pages of the book. Small screws were gently replaced with new ones. So you're not going to tell me what happened to him? The man lied, coming up with a quick response. He came and picked it up. I left it siding out on the porch rail. Changing the conversation. Merle's busy with sewing? In response to the priest, she was making stew. Rabbit? I'm not much of a rabbit fan. I prefer plain beef. Traditionalist, huh? Beef is great. I prefer steak over stew. But if you make a good broth with onions and carrots, man, rabbit is a bit gamey, but it's sweet, chucking. I always had trouble eating them, though. They look so innocent and helpless. The box was fixed. I guess in these uncertain times, any animal you can get your hands on would be good game. Didn't come up with anything yet? Nope. The traps only catch some birds, and they aren't even considered a family meal. We do get the occasional fox. It's good, but there just isn't any deer around here anymore, huh? There used to be massive herds from here to the northwest before you reached Oakwheel. It's like they just left. If it wasn't for the crates we get from those fine people, we'd starve. Seeing the wooden crates and barrels of goods logged in the storehouse, what's in there? A wide range of fruits, vegetables, and this thing called clean meat. Clean meat? Yeah, I mean, it looks like meat, beef, chicken, pork, but they said it wasn't from an animal. Then how did they get it? Amused by it all. Apparently they grow it like a plant. Strangest thing you ever heard, right? Growing meat. Tastes the same so. As he finished his long cig, he took in the dark. Brother Bishop gave him a good pat on the shoulder and continued his duty. There was no one left outside, just a man and his checkered pants.